Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. We broadcast out of the Northwest, Portland, Oregon, which is the home of probably the largest bookstore in the United States. It's 4 stories of reading fun with a building that sits right next to it that just has science and technology all by itself. Why this is important is because the staff there is very well read, and if you get your book placed in a prominent position, such as the bookcase in the entranceway, you know you've got something special going on there. And that's what's happening today as we're joined with Sally Green, who is the author of a book titled Half Bad, which is the very first book she's written, and it's also the beginning of a trilogy that's taking the world by storm. We're going to be joined talking about this book today, how this all happened, what the story is about, and where we're going to go from here. And I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program our guest, Sally Green. Sally, how are you today?
I'm great. Thank you, Daniel. Thanks for inviting me on the show.
Oh, you bet. Well, you know, it's one of these kind of stories people take a look and they say, well, wait a minute. Okay, so here you are, you're a wife, you're a mother of one. All of a sudden you just decided you're going to pen a book because you found the love of writing and lightning comes out of a bottle. How can you explain something like that?
I honestly don't know. It really has been amazing. I never thought of myself as remotely imaginative at all. So yeah, I've been surprised. But I just had an idea for a story, and I actually thought I'd have a go. Why not? And I have always enjoyed putting words on paper, but I've never, as I say, never thought I had imagination enough to come up with certainly not with a novel. But once I got into the characters, I just found I loved it, and I couldn't stop writing.
Mm-hmm. They sort of kind of took a life of their own, huh?
Definitely, yeah. I think that's for me, and I really I couldn't stop thinking about them. Didn't want to stop thinking about them, and yeah, I just enjoyed it, and I suppose now I have to admit I do have an imagination, but it's taken me a while to realise it. Yes, I'm in my 50s now, and it's probably only dawned on me in the last few years that I have got one. I think most people do as well, but it's just we're too busy doing ordinary things. We don't have time to think about other things.
Well, we call them ordinary things, but sometimes they're just not as good for us as we would like to think they are, right?
Yeah.
Living,
busy.
Carefully and taking the right steps and doing the right thing, and then deep inside you're asking yourself, why am I doing this nonsense? This is too destructive for me. I need to do something else, and that's where the bad side comes in, right?
Yeah, that's right. And I think for me, certainly, I was very busy, certainly in my 20s and 30s, with my career, totally, really serious. I was an accountant and then worked in practice in accountancy and then worked in business. And I was just, got home exhausted in the evening and had a glass of wine, watched TV, and fell asleep, really, and started again the next day. So, and I think a lot of people are in that sort of, I won't call it a rut because I enjoyed it at the time, but I definitely had enough of it by the time I'd reached my 40th birthday.
Mm-hmm. Now, this particular story, Half Bad, like I said, when you go to Powell's City of Books, this is a city that reads, and your book is prominently displayed in the entryway bookcase.
I'm so pleased with that. I didn't know. I'm really pleased. Thank you for telling me.
Yeah, well, if you ever get a chance to come to Portland, Oregon, believe me, this here is really a tourist attraction. Powell City of Books is really a place to be experienced. So I can't say that enough because there's actually a total of 5 Powell's bookstores, and these are really cool places like where you would expect to go in and find that secret alchemy book somewhere dusty in the back. That's the way these places actually look. They don't look like a Barnes & Noble or anything like that. I mean, this is a place you sit, you have coffee, maybe even a salami sandwich, and you read a book without even buying it. So that being said, the fact is your book is about witches, and it's really interesting, because this day and age with Harry Potter and the like, people are saying, well, another one of those, but this is really quite different than what people are used to. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it is quite a lot darker, I suppose, than Harry Potter. It's certainly aimed at a sort of teenage audience, higher-end teenage audience, and adults as well, but not for really young children, I suppose. But I have to admit, when I was writing, I didn't really think that I had so many similarities to the Harry Potter ideas, in that it's set for the large part in Britain. It's about a British boy who's a witch, and it's in the present day, and witches are living secretly amongst ordinary people. So far, so Harry Potter. But the rest really is very different. Certainly my writing style is much different. It's very much darker, and really the story is about this one boy called Nathan who's caught between the two sides, the black witches and the white witches, and he's caught in the middle. They're sort of enemies. The white witches have driven out the black witches from Britain, and Nathan is left behind. His mother was a white witch. His father is the most evil of the black witches, and nobody's quite sure what to do with him. And it's a really sort of his struggle to find out which side he belongs to, and about himself, and various adventures along the way.
Now, was witches something that you grew up being fascinated with? Is that what kind of compelled you to bring a story like this out?
No, this is the other really strange thing. I never thought of myself as a writer, and I certainly never thought of myself, and I'm still not really a great reader of fantasy fiction. But I have read the Harry Potter books, having said that. But I think, in a way, that's partly one of the reasons why people say Half-Bad is quite different from other fantasy books. I've not been influenced by many of them, because I wanted to tell Nathan's story. So it's a lot about the boy and his sort of struggles and his growing up. It's a sort of coming-of-age story as much as anything, but with this backdrop of the witches idea. And I came to that because sort of something unusual I did back in, about 2009. I was invited to a storytelling festival with some friends, and I've never been to anything like that. I went, it was sort of a long weekend, and this is just storytelling, so it's quite a lot of performance, and a lot of the stories were sort of mythic, Celtic legends, and sort of witchcraft and fairy tales and things like that were involved. And that really got me going onto it. I just loved it. I had a fantastic weekend, and that was sort of the beginning of an idea came from that.
Mm-hmm. I know that as you start your book about young Nathan, it's about a boy that's basically being child abused, for lack of a better word, because, Harry is locked in a cage, and when he's pulled out, he's kind of driven and, possibly beaten a little bit. And it's difficult and that's an interesting issue to start out with, that here's the son of a white and a black witch, so there must be some power inherent in him. So it's kind of like you start off with this abusive behavior toward this child, but somehow inherently knows if he can just get through this and get away, that things will start correcting themselves and life would probably get better.
Yeah, he's at the beginning of the story. It sounds awful, and it is awful, actually. He's being kept in a cage as a prisoner of the White Witches. And when I was writing it, I was really sort of, questioned myself, have I gone too far here, and what would the White Witches do? And I actually couldn't think of anything else that they would do with him practically, be it for various reasons I won't go into to spoil the story. But he has to be kept outside in a cage, and he is abused, and physically and mentally, really, and that's one of the important aspects for me. I don't want to show it as any lighter than it is. It really is quite horrible, and it's meant to be. And I don't want I think it's important, if you're going to have any violence or any kind of abuse in a story, to show it for what it is, that it's awful, and it's not. Don't make light of it anyway. And he struggles through it, and he has a he's a very strong character. He does get through, but he also has darker moments where he doubts himself as well.
Mm-hmm. So now, is this something that you kind of knew and were just bothered by growing up, or how did the idea of, let's say, the abuse of this Nathan come into play as far as the story is concerned?
I think this is back to this issue I've just mentioned, that I personally think it's quite important in a way. I know there's quite a lot of talks about should we have violence in books, certainly those books aimed at children and teenagers. This is for teenagers, and I think it's important to actually address all issues and to show, not glorify them in any way, and to so that people can talk about them and say, really see how bad they are. And I think it's teenagers and everyone sees it on the news all the time. There's horrific things going on all over the world, and I think this should be shown in fiction as well. It's nothing to be sort of hidden away from. It should be sort of thought through quite clearly, I think, and that's one of the things I wanted to do in the story. And there's a whole load of things sort of got, as I say, I tried to each stage say, I certainly didn't want to do anything for sort of dramatic impact without it being totally what I thought was true to the characters and the story, and thought that, that really would happen. And I was quite shocked, actually, how easily things got carried away, and the White Witches, who think of themselves as the good guys, how quickly they actually turn bad once they've got too much power, really.
Which is one of the assumptions that you certainly, address of many, that you tend to say, hey, we really need to look at our beliefs and address these assumptions that we're making about things here, like, for instance, black witches are bad.
Yeah, that was one of my, because when I had the idea, my very first idea for writing a story about witches, I thought, well, what do I know about witches? Not very much, but I know there's white witches who are the good guys and the sort of healings element, and the black witches are the evil ones and generally wear black and nasty and destructive. And just then straight away thought, well, wouldn't it be great fun to play around with those assumptions that you assume the white witches are going to be the good guys, and Nathan is brought up in that environment, but he sees that actually that isn't necessarily so. But equally, it doesn't mean the opposite. When he gets to meet, on each side there are good ones and bad ones, and it just really depends on the individual.
It's interesting. Some years ago, I was watching. It was made into a movie, The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. Okay, and I was watching this and thinking to myself, how come it's been decided these guys are the evil ones, and that these guys are the self-righteous good guys going to stop and destroy these bad ones, when they probably just want almost about the same thing that these good guys want? And how do we assign, for instance, who the good guys really are?
Exactly, and it really is perspective. If you're on one side, you think you're the good guys, and that's certainly one of the things I want to address in Half Bad, and sort of make people question and wonder who is good, and it certainly, the white witches do think of themselves as good and of driving out the bad witches and protecting each other, but they just go too far, really. Their power goes to their, not necessarily to their heads, but they just have no one to actually temper them and stop them, and certainly towards Nathan, they're incredibly cruel.
Well, the other thing, too, is you talk about the taste for power, that anyone can be corrupted by that, especially if they have little to no experience with it. A good example of that is in the novel, as well as this was turned into a movie as well, which is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Are you familiar with that one?
Yes, I am. I love that film.
Okay, in my opinion, Nurse Ratched has to be probably the evilest villain of movie history. I mean, she takes out Frankenstein, Dracula, all of it, And for those who aren't familiar, she is the lead nurse in a sanatorium that Jack Nicholson goes to. And she really, is just doing her job, but slowly begins to show, if you're going to mess with me, you got to realize I could keep you in here for the rest of your life and make you miserable. And you think, and she's so cold about it as well.
Yeah,
and you realize here's somebody doing a job that's supposed to be sure that people are safe and going about their business, but again, a little taste of power and you're in a lot of trouble, pal.
Yeah, it's that coldness. I think you're right there. That's one of the frightening things about her, is just, really nasty. And it's interesting, a lot of the comments in my book about, because there's a number of unpleasant characters, but the one that everyone seems to dislike the most is the Jessica, who's Nathan's eldest sister, who is absolutely horrible towards him. But compared to some of the others who are physically violent to Nathan, she actually isn't. She is just a bully and nasty, has a really nasty tongue, and says horrible things to him. And so it's interesting that she's the one that everyone hates, and even though he actually is never hurt physically by her. So yes, but she's the one who sort of seems to be the most unpleasant.
Nothing like creating a bad character, huh? I'm kind of curious because this is the beginning of a trilogy. Is this something that has that kind of rich story in it that it needs to go as a trilogy?
Yeah, I had a trilogy in mind when I started writing. So
okay.
I have to admit, I plot really not very vaguely, and it's all in my head. But I had an idea that it really is the three stages of Nathan's life. So Nathan in the first book, in Half Bad, it takes us up to his 17th birthday, which is the day the young witches have to go through a ceremony on the 17th birthday to become a full adult witch. And so that's really the story of the first book. And then the second book is sort of the next stage of his life, and we carry on from there. So yeah, I can see there's an awful lot. I must admit, it's a huge amount of work I could write about it, because it's a whole world out there, and I'm loving doing it. It's as I said before, it's something I've discovered sort of late in life, but I'm just loving doing.
Now, there must be a resonance within your story for people around the globe, because this book has been now translated into 45 different languages, I understand?
That's right, yeah.
That's pretty impressive.
It is. Don't ask me to name them, because there's some,
no, it doesn't
that
matter.
I can't even
45
pronounce
languages,
myself.
all people need to know it's a language they don't speak, probably, so.
Yeah, it's actually, and that, you're right, that's one of the lovely things is that is how people have really taken to these issues, this issue of good and bad, and I suppose they are worldwide issues, and the black witches and white witches and the assumptions we make about who's good and bad. And everyone over the world has sort of picked up on that as something that they've can relate to in their different societies. Yeah, it's great. And I'm really pleased. I just recently met my Ukrainian publisher, so that's in the news at the moment, and they are loving it out there, which is really nice. So I'm delighted with every one of them, though. And America, of course, obviously. So that's really a thrill. That was definitely my biggest thrill, getting my publishing deal for the United States.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'm curious, because we've kind of touched on one, which is the idea of who's the good witch and who is the bad witch. What are a couple of the other major assumptions that you tackle within this story, if you don't mind sharing that with our listeners?
Oh gosh, I think the major assumption is where Nathan is going to be, because Nathan is the young hero of the book, if you like, but he's not a good guy at all. He himself can be quite violent and pleasant, and yet I think, and also he doesn't know himself how he's going to turn out. Is he going to be more like his mother, who was a very kind and loving, healing white witch, or is he going to turn out more like his father, this evil black witch? And he doesn't know himself. And I think it's interesting that a lot of readers have said they can't quite figure him out with it. They do think he's quite good, but he just shows some sort of evil tendencies, not evil, violent tendencies at times. But he's pushed into a corner, so I think that's understandable. So I particularly enjoyed doing that. And the other thing, I suppose, one of my favourite bits of the book is his relationship with his captor, the White Witch Celia, who's is a real tough character, and their relationship, I really was interested in how that would develop, because they spend pretty much 2 years together, alone together. She sort of keeps him in this cage and abuses him, and yet there is almost a mother-son relationship at times, and also a sort of or maybe a more sergeant major to private sort of thing. It certainly is a close relationship because they don't have anyone else to talk to, so they have to get on to a certain level. So I really enjoyed that aspect as well.
Now, were you someone growing up who was intrigued by witches? Is this something that you've always been fascinated by?
No, I really don't. I really don't read that sort of things, and there's sort of various sort of stories of witchcraft going back in time throughout Britain's history, and that is not what I'm interested in at all. It's not what I read about. But I think it just gave me a sort of starting point to make up my own world, and I think the other thing that gave me a certain amount of freedom in my writing is that when I started Half Bad, I didn't have a publishing deal. My dream was to have a publisher, but you're writing and here I am in my little office at home. You don't ever believe that's going to happen. So you have that, in a way, that gives you a certain amount of freedom. Just saying, I can do what I like. I can make up anything I like. I don't have to worry about anything too much because although I really want to get published, I know that the chances of that happening are pretty slim. But here I am now. It has all worked out. But at the time, I really never believed it would happen.
Mm-hmm. I just wondered about that because, when you're writing the kind of rich detail that you do about who they are and what they do and making assumptions, they don't wave wands and fly around on brooms and all these sort of things. I was thinking about the author of Conan the Barbarian, Robert E. Howard, and his was a fascinating story by itself, but what happened to him is one night Conan simply showed up in his kitchen.
All right.
And he says, "You're going to write my story," and I mean as though he was really there, and he says, "You're going to write this, or I'm going to strike you down and I'm going to kill you." And nervously enough, Robert sat at the typewriter and he started writing and writing and writing, and then finally, as the dawn came, he turned around and found that Conan was no longer there. So then what he decided to do is, well, I better get some rest, I better get myself, fortified here because he's going to be back and I want to be sure that he doesn't do this. And that's how he ended up writing all these Conan stories in a very short period of time. And I wondered, did you have a witch standing over you telling you she's going to turn you into a toad, or did this really just was it a lot of fun, like your son sitting there with you sort of a thing?
No, I must admit, I think I wasn't a lot of fun, to be honest. I think I was very caught up. I wouldn't say Nathan was with me, but I certainly spent pretty much 24/7 at times, intense periods where I'm sort of imagining, what would happen and how the dialogue that would go on, and I do, and I think to a lot of writers do this. You're almost acting it out in your head, and you close your eyes and you can see what's happening, and then you write it down. So that's certainly how I do it, and so it is a very intense experience. I can sort of relate to the Conan the Barbarian story, but no, he never appeared in my kitchen, Nathan. But I wish he would. He's rather gorgeous.
If he was trying to make cupcakes, maybe. Now, it's kind of just funny thinking about the possibility, folks. If you just, if you want to pen a bestseller, just make sure that you wait until your fear shows up. Now, I was trying to think of what I was going to ask you after this. We got stuck with Conan the Barbarian here. I think I'm getting nervous. So, when you sat down to do this, now, did you take a writing class? Is that where you discovered that, or just one day you sat down and you started writing and thought to yourself, I really rather enjoy this?
A mixture of things, really. I'd actually, I'd been working as an accountant. I mentioned this before. So I gave my career up in my early 40s, and I had my son then. I actually had my son when I was 41, just turned 41.
Wow.
And I stayed at home, and I was a stay-at-home mum basically, and that I absolutely loved that period of my life. But as he got a bit older and started school, I got a bit more bored, really, I suppose. And I started reading an awful lot more. So that was, I think, one of the beginning things. And I then did a course, nothing to do with creative writing, because it still hadn't occurred to me that that was what I would ever be interested in. But that, doing a course, a study course at home, actually got me into the habit of writing. And I think that was the crucial thing. That actually meant every month I had to write an essay for this course I was doing. Mm-hmm. And I think it was just a habit of writing. And when the course came to the end, that is when I suddenly sort of, I don't have an essay to write, and I have this idea for this story, this witch story. So that was it. I started writing, and then after this, that was well, gosh, when was that? That was June 2010. Over the summer of 2010, I wrote my first novel. And then in September, I'd finished it, and I had a really intense period of writing, but read it, and I thought, well, it's not bad, but it really is nowhere near publishable. There's loads of things wrong with it. And so then I did do some courses. I knew it's something I wanted to do then. And so I did a creative writing course, and in fact, actually, I've done 3 creative writing courses now. And I found them, for me, very useful. They've been great, but I took them very seriously. I worked really hard at them.
Mm-hmm. And that's the thing that I wanted to help address to our listening audience, because there are people out there that are writing, they want to pen that novel, and certainly deep inside they wish that they can actually make some sort of a living as a writer, but it's very difficult this day and age to capture the attention of what becomes more and more of an attention deficit society. But, at least the trick is we're getting the young to read more often than a lot of people assume they are. They assume they're just interested in playing video games, watching TV, and going to movies. And the truth is when you take a look at, for instance, series such as The Hunger Games or Twilight, you realize, no, these kids are actually reading, and they're probably a lot sharper than maybe we were at that time. But that you're saying what it takes is perseverance, it takes, hard work and dedication to doing this, and it just isn't going to come to you. You would really consider yourself lucky about everything that's happening, would you?
Yeah, I definitely think I have been incredibly lucky. And I can't say anything other than that. But also equally, I have worked it's been a very short and intense period since I started writing, but I have worked incredibly hard. So I did these creative writing courses, for example, and I was the really boring student who did every single item of work given us, and I worked my socks off at them. And I think I was fortunate that I wasn't having to do a 9-to-5 job at the same time, because I know a lot of people do, and it's really hard, because you've got, if you're writing, it really is. It's quite exhausting to put yourself into these other characters and think of what's going to happen to them. So yeah, I think it's a mixture of luck and hard work, which I think is probably true for just about every writer, to be honest. But I think the other thing that's really important is to enjoy it, because I think you have to love what you and really believe the story that you're writing. Which I definitely do.
And this was something that, as you said earlier in the program, came along after you turned 50?
Yeah, I started writing, so that was June 2010. I was 48, and I submitted Half Bad, the novel, to an agent, because you have to get an agent first before you can get a publisher. And I sent that to my agent, that was January 2013. And she she snapped it up straight away, which was great. And a real surprise, I can tell you, but I was absolutely thrilled, obviously. It happened very late in my life, but I think that in a way has been good for me. I don't think I can sort of take it in my stride to a certain extent. It's all thrilling, obviously, and it's just amazing, the languages and the fact that I'm talking to you in America now is just brilliant. But equally, I'm sort of, mature enough not to, I don't know, I can handle it, I suppose.
I like to bring that up because our show is much like your story, and that is we break assumptions. Now, here's one to consider, for instance, in America, the age of 50 somehow became where people think of 50-year-olds as senior citizens. Now, Sally, is that the same way as it is over there in England?
No, I don't. I think, oh, gosh. I don't.
Okay, well, good, because the fact is the 50-year-old is actually a very hip and energetic and on-the-go kind of a person, not a senior citizen.
Yeah, so I think that's certainly changing in the UK now. I mean, 65 has traditionally been the retirement age over here, so that's definitely seen as the age where, you're 64, you're young almost, or sort of, but 65 is retired, which is definitely the sort of, I mean, I hate to say it, but it's all seen as downhill, and yet I have to say that is changing. I think even that's changing now. Attitudes are definitely enlightening and realizing that you're not over the hill at that age either. And certainly not at 50. Goodness me, no.
No, of course not. Well, and that's what I was going to point out is that we have discovered, and we've certainly wanted to be the source of inspiration for people who are approaching or into midlife, to say, look, a lot of times we might have this feeling like by this age I should have had this going on, but that didn't happen, and well, that barrier, now I've got the next one, and by the time they reach midlife, there's this so-called crisis, at least for some people, like, geez, where did my life go, and do I have choices after this? And we have brought many inspirational stories on the program, and yours is certainly one of them. Look, you don't know if you've got that novel inside of you, but if you're getting up in the morning, still do something about it. You have that opportunity. You just don't know where it's going to take you. And it's based on that theme that a lot of people start thinking, they're right. As long as I can do something about it, then I owe it to myself to at least try. And that's, the people that you're addressing.
Yeah, I definitely believe that. And I think as well, certainly with my view on my life, as I said, I was an accountant for 20 years, and I could be quite negative about that, I suppose, and look back and say, oh gosh, what was I doing, wasting my time doing that? But I view it as, at the time, for the most part, I did find it very stressful, my career at the end, but for the most part, I enjoyed it, and every day I went into work and got a certain amount of satisfaction out of it. I can't say it was as brilliant as it could have been, but I think you have to look back and say, it wasn't the end of the world, it wasn't awful, and the various good things came out of it, whether it's financially or I made some good friends and things like that. So an experience, and I learned an awful lot. So I try to be positive about each stage, but equally, when I'd had enough, when I really had enough, I just thought, oh no, I've got to stop. I'd walk away from it, and move on to something else. And I've been totally surprised how the fact that my book's even published at all, but the fact that it's been published all over the world is just brilliant. But I do think. As I said before, I really worked hard at it, and but equally, if that hadn't happened, I would still be really pleased with the book that I've written and enjoyed doing it. So the good thing is now I can afford now to write the next one, which is the really great thing. That's what I really want to do.
We'll be looking forward to that one as well. I'm sure that you are probably discovering that the work of a writer now is probably a lot harder than you might have thought, right?
It's incredible.
Especially when a book explodes like yours. You're in for a lot of interviews, and oh my goodness, I gotta answer that same question again. Does it ever stop?
Yes,
I'm hoping I'm like one of the first shows for you in America because I've got you while you're fresh. But if I had you 8 months from now, I'm dead meat. Like, can we just get this over with?
I have to say the publicity side of things is a real shock. Yeah, and I think most writers, like myself, certainly, I prefer to be quite quiet and sit in the back room and
Sure.
and just write. But as my publisher says, we actually have to sell the books as well, Sally. So
Right.
people have to know about them, and so I have to write the books and help sell them. And it's fun actually. I did do a pre-publication tour in the United States back in January this year, and I met quite a few booksellers, people who work in bookshops from New York, Chicago, LA, San Francisco. And it was absolutely brilliant because I think, as you said at the introduction of the interview, these people who work in bookshops just love books, love storytelling, and get so enthusiastic. And the other thing that was really nice is I did a similar tour in the United Kingdom beforehand. And it was just, they were just exactly the same attitudes. There's the whole love of books and love of stories and so enthusiastic. It's great. So it's great meeting people like that.
Well, the other thing you come to know, too, is just because you got it out there and that one was successful, you owe it to these people if you don't want them to drop you like a bad habit to continue that. Otherwise, you'll disappear almost as fast as you got onto the scene in the first place.
That's
and
true,
I think that's another assumption people have is because you hit that just right, that you can kind of lay back and rest on your laurels. But anybody who's been in entertainment, just like myself, realizes, no, this is ongoing. You've got to sustain this. It's up to you.
Yeah, and it is really hard work. But it's, as I say, it's, you know, I'm not down a coal mine. It's not that bad. But the problem is juggling. You know, I'm a mum still, and I've got my home and everything to look after, and I've also got to write a book and my next book, and I'm doing the publicity and things. So it's just how many hours there are in the day. There's never quite enough as usual. But it's great. You know, gosh, I can't complain at all. It's fantastic.
Have you come to acquire the taste of airport sushi?
You know, funnily enough, that is one of the things I really like in an airport. How did you know that?
Oh, it was just a lucky guess. We're crazy about sushi in airports for some reason here in America.
I think it's a lighter thing because if you have too much stodgy stuff, it's not great for travelling. But I did quite a lot of, as I said, I travelled across the United States back in January, and I got into a real routine of various things, little habits that I had. But I have to say it went really smoothly. All the flights were on time. Everything worked brilliantly. So I had a great time actually.
Does your son travel with you and your husband as well, or?
No, on that one it really was. I did. I was over for 8 nights and 5 cities. I did. So it was. It was whirlwind, and quite. I was in Philadelphia for there was a librarians convention, and then in New York to meet my publisher. So it really was work, and I'm hoping another time we can come and do mix it up with a bit of sightseeing and holidaying as well.
Well, and just imagine this, Sally. You haven't even done the Comic-Con circuit yet, and you know that's on your plate as well, don't you?
I have been hearing things about this, and I know there's so many things to do, but yeah, that would be good. That would be great to meet. As I say, to meet people who are enthusiastic about books is great.
Well, I think the other thing, too, is that you're going to need to call on a super witch character that has a way of bending, stretching, and slowing time down for you, I think. Maybe that could be part of the third book of the trilogy. What's that?
He's going to need to appear in my kitchen for sure, isn't he? Yeah.
Well, Sally, we want to thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're a busy person, but for joining us here on the program, inspiring our listeners to know, roll up your sleeves, get to work, and just see what happens, but be enthusiastic about it. It's been a real pleasure. And it's been a pleasure for me as well. Thank you very much, Daniel. And before you go, is there a website people can find out more? Yeah, sure. My website is halfbadworld.com. Halfbadworld.com. That's right, yeah. All right. We'll look forward to seeing what happens. Sally, again, thank you for joining us on the program. It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Bye. You bet. We want to thank you, the listeners out there. Again, the book is Half Bad. Pick it up because it's pretty good. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for joining us. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.